Welcome to the Hot Topic Pod, topics hot off the press and news you can trust. I'm Carrie Killeen.
I'm Tim McDougall and we're your hosts.
Australians nationwide could legally grow and smoke cannabis by the end of the year if a Greens bill passes federal parliament.
There is a major push to legalise cannabis in Australia.
Should Australia legalise recreational cannabis?
In today's episode, we review the Greens' recent advice to federal parliament which suggests the legalisation of recreational use of cannabis. Currently in Victoria, the possession of cannabis for personal use is a criminal offence and punishable by a maximum 1 year imprisonment.
The Greens have been pushing for this legislative change for years, though the mobilisation of their campaign was ramped up earlier this year after they received constitutional advice in favour of the reform and began working with stakeholders to draft a bill.
Constitutional law expert Patrick Kaiser said, quote, "The Commonwealth can regulate the cultivation, licensing and sale of cannabis, and this includes all the ancillary machinery provisions needed to create a legal national market for cannabis."
Of course, like any law reform that is scrutinised by Parliament, there are pros and cons. Tim, what have been the main points of resistance to this bill?
Well, when we spoke to adjunct professor Nicole Lee, who works at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Institute, here's what she had to say.
Few risks and cons to regulating cannabis. The first kind of step of decriminalising would move people away from the criminal justice system, and that's one really important benefit of any drug law reform around cannabis. What it's done is move people away from the criminal justice system, but it also allows it reduces stigma, which we don't hear about a lot in the media. And reducing stigma means that there's a small proportion of people that do have problems with it. And if you look at all of the people who use cannabis, only a relatively small proportion of people would become dependent or have other problems. That small group is much more likely to come into treatment earlier if there's less stigma around drug use.
And our reporter Ben Astle spoke to Bernadette Thomas, who's a councillor at Maribyrnong City Council and a Greens candidate for the West Metro. She had a similar take on the question.
Really about, I guess, treating it as a health issue versus treating it, which is a positive, versus treating it as a criminal justice issue. And treating something like personal drug use or legalising cannabis as a health issue means that you have opportunities to interact with someone as a whole person rather than as someone who is sort of simply someone who's, broken the law, I guess.
The bill has significant backing from the public. A survey revealed 41% of Australians said they supported legalisation of cannabis. Our reporter Tiana Conjurin took to the streets of Melbourne to find out their thoughts.
I smoke weed just on my days off and stuff, just to calm me down. I'm a pretty busy person, so I've got gym, uni and stuff. So when I come back home, it's more just something to calm me down.
Relaxing. It's relaxing.
Feels pretty good. Keep it real. Kind of relax a bit.
Reducing anxiety.
That we should legalise marijuana in Australia. So, people don't know what they're smoking. I know a lot of my mates who do smoke or are very new to it. They don't know what they're intaking and stuff, and it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, I think those people raise some really interesting points. I think it definitely shows the difference between an older generation and a younger generation and how the stigma has been changing. It is anecdotal evidence of the trends we have been seeing, how cannabis has been found and viewed more favourably throughout the most recent surveys.
Yeah, and even the fact that a few of the interviewees were so open with the use of cannabis just shows that stigma is being removed and the use of cannabis is quite normalised in Australian society. I think a big part of that has been the pop culture aspect to the legalisation and the celebrities that have openly advocated for the legalisation of cannabis, particularly in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can look at figures in the US, big pop culture stars. You got Snoop Dogg, Jay-Z, Bella Thorne, these sorts of massive cultural icons.
And the US legalised marijuana use nationwide this year, actually. which has been in a lot of American media. It's been spoken about by a lot of influential people in the US that even people in Australia are listening to. So I think that a lot of Australians are comparing it to the US and the way they've legalised it, although it is quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where we need to ask Professor Lee what the differences between Australia's cannabis laws and the US will be.
Because there would be a lot of regulation around people being able to use it. Isn't just kind of going to be sold in shops and stuff. We probably wouldn't go down that route that America's gone. It's very, very commercialised. We have much tighter regulations.
And here's more of the discussion as our reporter Ben Astle sat down with Bernadette Thomas, councillor at Maribyrnong City Council. Here's how it went.
The Greens have talked recently about taxing marijuana products along the lines of how alcohol products are already taxed, with different levies for THC and cannabidiol content, in the same way that alcohol content is in correlation to how much that product is taxed. What is the Greens' stance on taxing marijuana? Is it economically as lucrative as taxing something like alcohol?
I think so, and the idea is to tax it at somewhere around the same level. So, in terms of percentage of sales tax or percentage of sales.
With the state election coming up in November, and the potential of a green wave on the horizon, I've heard talk of there being at least a lot of popular sentiment around the Green Party. How likely do you think legislation is to pass for legalizing recreational marijuana?
Look, I guess it depends on how many Greens we, the community will elect into Parliament and whether or not we have the balance of power in one or two of the houses. But certainly there are some allies already in the Parliament, but there's quite a few, MPs currently who don't support legalising cannabis, and also, there's mixed views within the community. So, we'd be opening up the conversation and then, working hard to influence our parliamentary colleagues, but also people in the community.
And that's all we've got time for in today's episode of The Hot Topic. If you do want to find out more on the issue, you can jump onto our website. This has been Carrie Colleen and Tim McDougall.
Thank you for listening, and this has been the Hot Topic Podcast.